The Things We All Carry is a podcast about first responders and their stories surrounding trauma on the job. The intention of this podcast is to raise awareness and share meaningful conversation around a subject often viewed as taboo or simply ignored. Be aware this content may be graphic and it is real. It may not be suitable for children or adults triggered by this subject matter.
Welcome back to The Things We All Carry. You know, I'm trying to think back. It's been 3 or so weeks since I stepped away from the fire service. And I've had a couple of realizations since I've done it. One of them is I guess the most recent realization to me is the fact that ever since I stepped away, it feels like I'm kind of just mailing it in life in general, just mailing it in. You know, I talked about it a little bit in one of these intros, and I said, I don't know why I expected myself to be immune from anything. I'm no different from anybody else just because I have this little platform and I speak into a microphone and interview people, and it doesn't mean I'm immune to any of it. And I've been going through it in my head. I've been going through it on a day-to-day basis, and I'm trying to grapple with where I am and who I am, and it's just not easy. The other day I was cleaning up and I came across a book that one of our rookies and who's now a friend of mine gave me, and his name's Jonathan Malave, and he is a firefighter with the he's in that firehouse I left when I stepped away from the fire service, and former Marine, and now he's embarked on his own career as a firefighter, and I got the pleasure of basically watching his first year unfold. And when he and I started talking a little bit, it hit me that, oh man, this is kind of cool because I got this guy with some depth and some knowledge, and I thrived off of those conversations. And he handed me a book one day, and it said, it's called The Excommunicated Warrior, The 7 Stages of Transition. And I'm going to butcher the author's name, and he's a badass, so he'd kick my ass, I'll tell you that. It's Nick Koumoulatsos. It's a Greek name, and I've destroyed that, so you guys look it up. It's called Excommunicated Warrior, and it's, like I said, it's the 7 stages of transition. And now, this guy's coming from, I believe, like a Marine Raider background, and, you know, top of the top in the Marine Corps and Special Forces, and, badass teams. And he decided that after his 12-year career that he was going to step aside and make a go of it on his own. You know, he was a husband, a father, and he's trying to make his way in that civilian world. And from that, you know, you can kind of extrapolate similarities. I'm not saying that firefighting and special forces are equal by any means. But, when you step away from the fire service, you leave a family behind. You leave a crew. You leave a routine. You leave a comfort behind. And like I said, I don't know why I thought I might be immune to it, because I'm certainly not. And as I read through his book, some of it for the second time, some of it for the first time, because I had put it down after starting it, and it restarted it the other day. And I read through it and I go, yeah, that makes sense. That's me, and I won't give the whole book away, but it does have 7 stages. And, he talks about apprehension, excitement, and then this bowl of bad emotions. First is apprehension. You make this decision to step away from something you've done for years. And, I had that, and it kind of didn't register with me until I read it again. And I said, yeah, of course I had apprehension. I walked around for a year with my papers in my bag. For a year. I didn't do anything with them. 3 times I changed the date. 3 times I ripped it up. And even the day that I mailed it, I thought to myself, what the fuck did I just do? Knowing all along it was the right thing for me to do, but it doesn't matter. I still had that apprehension. Then there's this excitement, and you get to it and you're like, okay, this is it. I'm stepping out, something new. In the book, he talks about it too. It's the shortest stage of this, of the transition. And it was, because within minutes, it seems like that excitement wears off. And once that excitement wears off, you're like, what now? What do I do? And that's when that bowl of bad emotions, as Nick calls it in the book, comes about, and you start swirling with it. And it's a battle. And to be honest, that's kind of where I am right now. It is a battle. And it's I don't know how many emotions there are. I know that there are a lot of negative emotions. There's still some good ones, but apprehension, that fear of failure, that negative self-talk, convincing myself that I fucked up, that that what did you do? Why would you do this? Why would you walk away from something into the unknown? Why? Why would you jeopardize that? And there's really that negative self-talk telling myself that I can't do it, I won't do it, that that you won't succeed, that I won't make of myself what I need to in order to succeed. And again, I don't know, what is success? I'd like to feed myself and house myself and clothe myself and do some travel and those things. But what is success? I don't know. So I'm in that middle of that third stage, that bowl of bad emotions, and I'm swirling in them. I'm trying to sift through them and figure out where to go, which ones to put aside, which ones to pay attention to, which ones to really deal with immediately, and which ones that I can put aside for right now and concentrate on my daily moves. It hasn't been easy. And some people have asked me, how's retirement? What should I expect when I step aside? You can expect those three things I just told you. I can speak to that. I know that. I had the apprehension, I have the excitement, and now I had this bowl of bad emotions. And it is not a great feeling. I'm happy to say that I'm not drinking. I'm getting decent sleep. And so all that stuff helps. It helps me with a clear mind. And if I didn't have that, I think it would be so much worse. My emotions are regulated because of that. But you add in anything like that on top of all the emotions, and it's a recipe for disaster. And that is basically what the fourth chapter is about. And I haven't reached that, and I'm hoping to prevent reaching that, because that fourth chapter is about, circling the drain. Circling the drain can be defined and interpreted in a few ways, but circling the drain where you just want to throw in the towel, you want to give up this chase, you want to give up this idea of what you have, or in worst case scenario, give up life. And then I'm looking ahead, and sink or swim is the next one. And yeah, that's what this is. You either sink or you swim. And I've always loved the water. I've always loved being in the water, and swimming is my thing. So I have to find a way to swim. It's like I think it's like the old saying where they're like, are you drowning? And you're like, you kind of, yeah, I'm drowning. They're like, well, stand up. And then you put your feet down, you realize you're in 2 feet of water. You're not in 10 feet of water, and you can stand, and you can wade through the issues, and you can wade through the troubles, and you can walk to shore. And walking to shore is starting to blaze that path forward. In the book, he talks about the fact that, when he walks out of there, he called it the Death Star where he was stationed. And when he walks out of the Death Star for the last time after turning in his ID card and he got his paperwork, and anyone who's been in the military knows what I'm talking about when I say DD 214. When he gets his DD 214 and he walks out of that Death Star for the last time, when I read it the first time, he made it sound so dramatic, the door slams and you realize you're never going back in there again. And I'm like, okay, whatever. It's like, at first I thought it was over dramatized, but then I realized, no, it's true. When the door shuts, you're not going in there again, at least not in that fashion. And you have to be prepared for it. And I'm going to implore people from this moment on that if you're in the fire service, you're a cop, you're in the military, you need to foster your life outside of that. You have to foster that. If you do not foster the identity that is outside of your service, you're going to flounder. I am floundering, and I have an identity outside of the service. Now, it's my job to figure this out. It's my job to put my feet down and to stand up in 2 feet of water and not overreact. And it's my job to stay clear of mind enough to realize that the world isn't ending, and the prospect the prospect of a future is brighter than what my brain wants to convince me it is. I miss some of those voices and those faces that I was seeing every day. I miss that support, and I need to find the ways to replace it. And that's one of the things I'm working on. How do I replace that? How do I get that little bit of that piece back of the support and the camaraderie and I'm dying for that humor again. I'm dying for some laughter. I'm dying for the inappropriateness. As bad as it sounds, I want that inappropriateness again. I want the moments around that kitchen table where we try to top each other on what you can say and how you can shock. And when you get a good one in there and there's something about it. It is so much. It's so much fun, and it's a team building, and it's family bonding is what it is. Twisted, but still family bonding. I recorded an intro earlier for this show, and that's where I got this idea of I was just mailing it in, because I recorded this intro, or recorded that intro, and I walked away thinking, nope, that wasn't it. I didn't like it. It was matter of fact and boring and impersonal. And then I walked away realizing that I had just recorded a show that was basically that same way. I mailed it in. Something else was on my mind, and I did not give enough credence to the guest that was speaking. And I feel horrible, and I'm going to have to cover that with the guest, and I'm going to have to offer up the chance to record again, because I feel like I fucked it up. And it's because my mind was occupied and I was wallowing a little bit. And I realized that's not fair to the guest, and that wasn't fair to me, and it wouldn't be fair to you guys. And so here I am telling you, I've been mailing it in, and I have to stop doing that. Your support, this show, these stories, it's all too important for me to BS my way or as I say, mail it in. You guys deserve better than that. These stories deserve better than that. And I'm here to tell you that I am better than that. Welcome to episode 112 of The Things We All Carry. This week's guest is Dr. Glenn Landry. Dr. Landry is a sleep expert, an expert in circadian rhythms, and he's a much smarter man than me when it comes to sleep, the functions of sleep, why we sleep, how we sleep, stages of sleep, all of it. To talk to this man is enlightening and fascinating. He's been an expert in sleep for over 30 years now. He's out of Vancouver, Canada, and his company is called Elite Sleep, and you can find him at elitesleep.ca. Matter of fact, he has an online program for shift workers, and it's surviving shift work and how to prep yourself and how to sleep and how to get the best sleep you can despite being on shift work. And Dr. Landry and his company have been more than gracious with both their time and with a discount for this program if it's something that you're interested in looking at. Again, elitesleep.ca, and look under their services, and it's surviving shift work. And if you enter the code TTWAC, you'll get a 40% discount. And that's, to me, he believes in this program, and he's willing to give that kind of a discount to first responders and listeners. I think it's fantastic. Once again, elitesleep.ca, and it's surviving shift work, and you enter the code TTWAC, and you'll qualify for a 40% discount. I'm getting nothing back from this. This is just me, a big believer in a program, and sleep being a huge benefit to first responder community. This episode was it's a little bit under 2 hours now that it's put together, but we spoke for over 2 hours, and we could have gotten deeper in the weeds about sleep. But one of the things that Dr. Landry is really good at is taking that science and bringing it to the layperson, to the masses, and you know, not just feeding you science, but telling you what it means for your body. So we cover a lot of things. We cover circadian rhythm. We cover the stages of sleep and what each stage does and what your brain does and what your body does and the biology behind some of it. Sleep is one of the reasons I stepped away from the fire service. It definitely fed into that decision to step away from the fire service because sleep is just too important as you get older, especially. And shift work, as Dr. Landry says, it is advanced aging, and I don't need to age any faster. I want to thank Dr. Landry for coming on, for taking such a chunk of time and spending it with us when he broke it down. He made me understand it. Hopefully he's making everybody else understand it. So sit back, enjoy episode 112 of The Things We All Carry with Dr. Glenn Landry. And then you guys get out there, get out in that weather. Spring is coming. Get out there and do something for yourselves. A quick reminder to please help us build a community which not only recognizes, but supports each other through the struggles and recovery. Reach out through Instagram at The Things We All Carry, or email my story at thethingsweallcarry.com to offer support and share your story. Please remember to leave a review on iTunes and give a shout out to any first responder you know, love, or care about. Y'all enjoy the show. You are the expert. I'm along for the ride, and I will interject my silliness or my questions at some point.
Yeah, questions. Yeah,
absolutely. So all right, perfect. I'm ready if you are.
Good to go.
All right. Well, welcome back to The Things We All Carry. This morning, and it's afternoon for me, but it's morning for Dr. Landry out there in Vancouver. I have Dr. Glenn Landry, and he is a sleep expert who was recommended to me by Mr. Ben Vernon out there in San Diego. He has an amazing story, and Ben is one of those genuine human beings. And when Ben told me that he had a couple of people he wanted me to talk to, I jumped on it. And luckily enough, Dr. Landry was willing to come on and talk to me and share his information on sleep and how it affects us as first responders. So welcome to the show, Dr. Landry.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So Vancouver, how is it out there? Having nice weather today or what?
It is a beautiful day. We got our sunshine today, and we're getting ready for spring. About to live large.
Awesome, perfect. And I think that we're doing the same thing on the East Coast here in Virginia. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready to be done with winter. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into sleep and why?
Oh, thanks for asking. Let me say first that I came to the field honestly because I couldn't sleep. So as a teen, this really started when I was 14. And I had dutiful parents. They wanted me in bed for 10:30 as a teenager. And I would get into bed, but I just couldn't fall asleep. I am, at the time it was undiagnosed, but I'm essentially an extreme night owl, meaning that the condition is called delayed sleep phase onset, but it means that it's really hard for me to fall asleep. And I had, my parents were working professionals. They would be asleep by 11 and they would sleep hard. They were exhausted. They'd sleep hard until about 5:30 in the morning when they had to start getting ready for work. And so what would happen is, before they'd be heading out, they would be making sure that I was up and about and getting ready for school. And I simply couldn't sleep. The hours from 11 o'clock at night until 4 in the morning were my favorite time of day, even though that wasn't day.
Mhm.
And I learned over time that, that's when my brain was ready to really function at a high level. And so I could write papers. I could do it, prep for exams. I could study. Like my brain wanted to be active at that time. And so I used that time. But what that meant is that the hours from 7 in the morning until 11 in the morning were not my friend. I'd be falling asleep by 4:30, and I would sleep until 7:30. I'd have to get up, make it look like I was getting ready for school. my mom would be off to work and I'd get back into bed and I'd sleep for a few more hours and then I'd make it to class. And I wasn't a problem student. It's a very different world back then. And I wasn't a problem student and they didn't have, email to be in touch with my parents
Right.
and calling my parents and saying, "Hey man, Glenn didn't make it into class again today." I was doing well enough in classes. I was getting good grades. I was smart enough to, catch up on the material that I had missed. So it wasn't a red flag. It wasn't, I wasn't in urgent need of intervention. So my teachers were like, "Hey, as long as you get the work done and you're doing fine, we're good." And then when I got into university, I had much better control over my schedule. I wouldn't schedule any classes that were in the morning. All the classes that I would take would be afternoon and evening. But I had one big problem. I could completely shift my whole way of living. Extreme night owl. So I would be going to bed very, very late, sleeping in until 11, and then, living with the rest of the world during the afternoon and evenings. But the problem I had is those final exams or midterm exams that would be scheduled for 8:30. I had no control over those exams. And so whenever I had one of those, I was in trouble. And so I'm going to tell you a few life-changing moments. The first life-changing moment was meeting Dr. Ralph Misselberger, world-renowned expert in circadian rhythms and sleep. Circadian rhythms are daily biological rhythms. You can think of it as we have daytime physiology, biology, and behavior. We have nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. We need to keep those separate because they're incompatible processes. And what Dr. Ralph Misselberger, I took a course and I learned about circadian rhythms. And life-changing moment number one was him saying, "Hey, Glenn, get yourself a pair of these." So these are UVEX. They're blue blockers. They're orange tinted lenses. You can see, if you can see the camera, you can see right now, I'm using very, very bright light to tell my brain and body that this is day. And if I were to put these blue blockers on, you can see this is a signal that says this is night. And as soon as I started using these, and they're super expensive, it's going to cost you $15 US to get a pair of these. But once you start using those to tell your brain in the hours before I wanted to go to bed. So what I really wanted was to be able to get to bed for 10, 10:30 and sleep until 7, 7:30, and then get up and get to the lab, be able to be part of, a regular work day. As soon as I started preparing my brain and body, here's the first thing to really understand. Your brain must be ready for sleep at the time that you've scheduled it. There are processes that have to happen to prepare. So your brain has to anticipate the sleep window, the time that you're actually going to be trying to sleep. It has to anticipate that sleep window, prepare for it so that you can get the sleep you actually need. And so that was such a game changer for me, because once I started being able to fall asleep for 10 o'clock and be able to sleep through to 7, I went from being a good, not great student to being able to compete and win national scholarships that funded my honors, my master's, my PhD, as well as my postdoctoral fellowship in university. And so that was the first, game changer, if you will. Now, the second, after I finished my undergrad, I had joined Ralph's lab and I had done my honors in Ralph's lab. And then we discovered that we have these really nasty genes that predispose my family to some, pretty bad things. Alzheimer's disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and dementia. And so the issue there is that the brain's like an engine. It produces exhaust.
Right.
And these genes that I have extract the absolute most out of my diet in terms of cholesterol and so they also produce more exhaust. So the brain's like an engine. It produces exhaust. My genes mean that I produce much more exhaust than the average individual. But it turns out that sleep quite literally washes away the day's waste. So even though I have these nasty genes, In 2013, these mechanisms were mapped out really well in the sleep science. It's evolved dramatically in the last decade. And so it turns out that by being an elite sleeper, by getting really healthy sleep, sleeping, I have a 9-hour sleep window, going to bed at 10, getting up at 7. I still have that to this day. I'm 54 now. And by having those sleep windows protected, I'm able to get a 9-hour sleep window, get 8 hours of actual sleep each night. Even though I'm producing more exhaust, I'm able to wash away that exhaust. And so that allows me to be much, much more productive and healthier. And so that was life-changing moment number 2. Learning how to get the sleep I needed, and then learning that I really needed this sleep more than most. That was, profound. And then the final life-changing moment, I would say, after spending 20 plus years thinking that I was going to just be faculty, and that I would be, spending my professional career producing science, publishing that science. What I discovered is that my niche is actually in translating science. What makes, me happiest is when I'm out in the public helping people take the science and apply it to their lived experience so that they can make good on the promise of their sleep, so that they could be their best selves, living their best lives. And what I discovered is that there is this gap. We're very good at producing science in North America, in fact, worldwide. But where North America is falling down is there is this gap in translating the science.
Yes.
People being able to get access to that science and really understand it. The internet, there's a ton of information out there in the internet. And, people always want to know, well, what are the 3 things that I need to do to improve my sleep, for example? And the truth is that if you go out there on the internet, you'll get information, but we're all individuals. And so where that information doesn't work is that the science applies to the individual based on how they live their lives, what their genetic makeup is. All of these things have an impact. And so you can't just simply say, here are the 3 things you need to know. You have to be able to apply the science in a way that actually has the greatest impact for you. And that was life-changing moment number 3 is transitioning from academia into private practice. And that's what brings me here to you today.
And so that's what you do. You teach sleep.
I do.
So what, as firefighters or first responders working either shifts or 24-hour shifts, I mean, where do we start? What do we need? What do we need to know? What do we need to do? And I know that we can get down to the minutia about it, and that fascinates me. And so, where do we start with this for first responders or shift workers?
I think the starting point is understanding what drives sleep. Understanding that, again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the brain and body must anticipate this sleep window and then prepare for it so that you can get the sleep you need each night. What I would say is, again, people want to know the 3 things they need to do. In general, what we need to understand is that we must build a sleep window. And that sleep window needs to be as routine as possible, because it is that routine that makes it possible to anticipate the sleep window for it. So building the sleep window is step number 1. And then protecting that sleep window is step 2. And we protect the sleep window by being very good about what we do during the day, as well as at night when we can't sleep, so that we protect this sleep window. The idea here is we have these physiological processes that drive our sleep architecture. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but these physiological processes, again, must anticipate and prepare so that we can get this sleep. And what I call these sleep processes the sleep accountant. And the sleep accountant's job is to track our previous sleep-wake history, determine what the deficits are, and to look at the kind of day that we've had. No 2 days are the same. Some days might be physically strenuous. Other days might be emotionally taxing or psychologically taxing. Some days might involve a ton of new learning. Other days might have been incredibly sedentary and we didn't do very much. No 2 nights are the same in terms of our sleep need because no 2 days were the same. Our sleep accountant's job is to take the sleep window that we provided and find a way to balance the books. And it does so over, hopefully a night, but if not, it's going to try to balance those books over successive nights. And that's really the job of the sleep accountant. And the challenge that we have is that the way we live our lives, we've actually gone beyond what we evolved for optimal health and performance, as well as safety. The challenge is understanding how we've gone away from that. When I started in the field almost 30 years ago, we'd known for decades that sleep changes as a normal course of aging. And how that changes is we would find that by about 70, we'd start to see these changes where an individual could fall asleep. In fact, was tired and would really begin falling asleep a few hours before the time they intended to. They're sitting in the comfy couch, watching Netflix or doing something. I guess 30 years ago, they weren't
I was
watching.
going to say.
They'd be sitting in the comfy couch after dinner.
Right.
And they'd be off, sitting in that comfy couch. Then it would be time for them to get to bed. They get into bed. Sometimes they might struggle to fall asleep, but typically they would be able to fall asleep and they'd be able to sustain about 3-4 hours of sleep, but then they'd begin to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
They'd get up to go to the bathroom, for example. Then they'd get back into bed. And over time, these awakenings would become more frequent and they would last longer. And that's what we call normal age-related changes in sleep health. This inability to sustain sleep for more than 3-4 hours. And then after that point, just a lot of sleep disruption and great difficulty getting back to sleep. And what I would say is, when I started in the field, that was 70 plus. In the last 20 years, we've seen this accelerate. And now those changes we see in people 30 plus. What I would say is that 30 to 50 is now the new young older adult. 50 to 70, the middle older adult, and then 70 plus are the real winners. And this is happening very much shift workers. That's just a model for accelerated aging. And so these changes that we're seeing, they're happening younger and younger. In fact, the truth is we're born with the ability to get the sleep we need, but how we currently live our lives is training that out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we are losing that ability. We're losing touch with that ability. And then we turn to, the internet, or we turn to sleep hacks,
right,
if you will, to try to get us the sleep we need. And the challenge that we have there is people don't really have an ability to evaluate the science and understand what's driving their sleep health. So that was a very long-winded way of answering your question. But what we really need to do, and shift workers must keep this in mind, we need to build a sleep window, protect that sleep window with what we do during the day and at night when we can't sleep, so that our physiological processes are prepared, our sleep accountant is able to use the sleep window effectively and balance the books. And, the next question, just to anticipate that, is, how do we go about doing that?
Actually, my next question is going to go back to that sleep, how sleep is truncated for 30 to 50-year-olds. And you said it's about our lifestyle. Are you saying, these machines that you and I are talking on right now, a computer or phone or iPad or the TV or whatever it is that affecting it? Or is it a multitude of things in our day-to-day lives now that we just didn't have 20 years ago or 30 years ago that has now shifted that truncated sleep down to 30 to 50-year-olds instead of 70-year-olds?
Yeah, that's an even better question. And the answer to that question is that it absolutely is multifactorial. So let's break this down into the objective that we have. And this is true for anybody, not just shift workers, but for anybody. We have these circadian rhythms, remember, daily biological rhythms. And we have clocks throughout our brain and body, thousands of them. In fact, every skin cell has its own clock. These clocks tell time, and they tell time slightly differently. So if they don't get external time cues to say this is day and this is night, if they don't get those time cues, they can drift out of phase with each other. So they're desynchronized. And that causes a real problem. Let's start with an understanding that we need a pacemaker that sets the pace for all these clocks. And what I would liken it to is it's very similar to a symphony, an orchestra, except that it's an orchestra with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of instruments. So imagine this massive symphony.
Yeah.
That orchestra, if you've ever been to the symphony, the first few minutes when, each instrument is warming up and getting ready, that's not beautiful music. That's, it's noise. They're all getting ready. Every performer is getting ready. It's not until the conductor comes out and brings all of the instruments in sync so that each instrument is doing exactly what it's supposed to do at exactly the time it's supposed to do it. And that's when you get the beautiful music. Very similar for us, these clocks throughout our brain and body, they must be synchronized. Again, daytime versus nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior, because they're incompatible processes. I mentioned, one of the things that can happen as we're getting a little bit older is that we'll get up to go pee, for example. Well, that is a really good example of circadian dysregulation. And here's what I mean. Nighttime physiology. An example of nighttime physiology is the bladder capacity expands at night and shrinks during the day. Urine production. During the night, urine production is hyper concentrated. And then during the day, not as concentrated. So what you have, if you've got really good day versus nighttime circadian rhythms, you've got smaller volume of urine being produced in a larger container to house it so that you can make it all the way through the night without having to get up to go pee.
Right.
But when we turn our nights into days and our days into nights, we flatten out those circadian rhythms. And then what ends up happening is that the bladder capacity doesn't expand, urine production doesn't become more concentrated, so we get up to go pee. It's multifactorial, but that is one component. And so what'll happen if we're not really good about these day versus nighttime cues is we flatten out our circadian rhythms. And that is a key driver in our poor sleep health. So, it's quite complex, but getting back to how we evolved, I want your audience to think of it this way. Think back to our earliest ancestors. Earliest ancestors living around the equator, got a ton of daylight exposure, but at night, we didn't have artificial light sources and electronics and things that you just mentioned. And so at night, light was moonlight, starlight, or the light of a fire. And what color is the firelight? It's orange. Orange means night. White and blue light means day. And if you're wondering about the blue light, here's the thing. We hunter-gatherers on the plains, their day wasn't always a sunny day. Some days were cloudy, overcast, rainy. Those cloudy, overcast, rainy days are rich in blue light, which is what I have on right now. It is that blue light that is the most consistent signal that it is day, and it is the absence of that light or orange light that says this is night. And so the first primary change, when I say that we've trained it out the way that we live our lives, the primary change is our light exposure profile has changed dramatically. A lot of us are indoor dwelling working, not getting a ton of daylight exposure. Then we come home, and in the evenings and in the night, we have artificial light sources and electronics, and they are blue rich. LED backlit devices are very blue rich. And so during the day, we don't get enough daylight. And then at night, we're getting too much blue light. And so it flattens out circadian rhythms, and we can't tell day from night from a physiological perspective. That's one change. We have a circadian pacemaker that tracks and synchronizes to the solar day-night cycle. That's one very important pacemaker. It's what we call the master circadian pacemaker, and it synchronizes our internal physiology, biology, and behavior to the solar day-night cycle. But we've changed the solar day-night cycle and flattened that out. So that's primary change. Here's another change. The way we live our lives. Our ancestors had to be very, very active during the day. I'm not saying exercise necessarily. I'm just talking about moving around and doing things, walking, breaking up sedentary time, because they had to do a ton of stuff just to acquire the resources necessary to sustain life. For us, a lot of us, again, indoor dwelling, but very sedentary during the day. But then at night, we're desk workers or we're sedentary during the day. But then at night, we finally have an opportunity. We know that we're supposed to exercise. So then we get out, we exercise, we do stuff. We're getting an exercise pulse, or we're doing our activity in the evening when it's just before we're supposed to be going to bed, for example. Or we don't have time to do that. So we are getting up early in the morning and we're getting to the gym in the morning early, shrinking our sleep window. The activity, instead of breaking up sedentary across the day and then being sedentary at night, we've got this reverse signaling. So there's a primary thing. I mentioned the pacemaker that synchronizes to the solar day-night cycle. We have another pacemaker that's distributed throughout our brain and body, and that pacemaker synchronizes to, if you will, everything that gives us joy. It synchronizes us to a reward signal. Food is a reward signal. Sex, activity, exercise, dopamine enhancer, all of that. Okay. It synchronizes to all of those cues. So think of it as we have a photic, a light synchronizer, and we have a non-photic, everything else. And those two signals can become decoupled, where instead of being in sync, they're out of sync. And if we look at the way that we live our lives in terms of light exposure profile and in terms of our physical activity, that's a major piece that's out of sync. And then finally, when we talk about food, most people have their largest meal of the day a couple, 2-3 hours before they're actually going to bed. And the largest meal of the day is a signal that says, this is the beginning of day.
Yeah.
And so if we're eating that largest meal just before we're going to bed, and think about it, we don't have time in the morning for breakfast for a lot of us. And then lunch, we're busy during the day, so it's lunch on the go. So it's not a stable signal necessarily. But then by the time we get home to be with our families or our friends, that's a social thing too. So we go out and we have our meals together. That's happening later at night. And so by that happening night, it's the most stable in terms of timing. We're exhausted and we're hungry at that point. So we're like, man, so we're going to eat our biggest meal of the day just a few hours before we're going to bed. And so what happens is we are taking our circadian rhythms that should be synchronized and we're taking them and flattening out the rhythms. So the way that we get light exposure, activity, and food is completely the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. And so we end up flattening out circadian rhythms. So the answer for all of us is to get back to how we evolved to be. And so in terms of meal times, it should be breakfast is the most important meal of the day, should be our largest meal of the day, because that's going to say this is the beginning of day. Our first light exposure, bright light, we should be getting first thing to say this is the beginning of day. And we should be breaking up sedentary every 30 minutes, at a minimum every hour, to say, this is an active time. This is our day signal. And then at night, we need to change those signals, and we need to say, okay, nighttime is the absence of light, and nighttime is the absence of activity and the absence of food. Now, we're going to talk about, how you work shifts. But first, we have to understand that shift work is a human invention. The days of the week are a human invention. Circadian rhythms, physiology, there is no distinction between a Monday, a Wednesday, a Saturday, or a Sunday, or night shift versus day shift, or 24s, whatever it might be. So we need to understand circadian rhythms and what drives daytime versus nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. That's why I'm talking about light, meal times, and physical activity. The next step is we've got strong day signals. Now we got to understand the strong night signals. The strong night signals are absence of light, absence of food, absence of activity. That gives us day versus night. Understanding how much sleep a person needs is the next piece. We evolved for a 16-hour waking day with unimpaired human performance, optimal performance, and then an 8-hour sleep window to get 7 hours of actual sleep. Like that's if you will, that's what we're designed for. Experts worldwide agree that we need the average adult, let's say 30 plus, needs 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep each night. Now, the truth is, we're nowhere near that. The average, and I'm not just talking shift workers, but the average adult, 30 plus right now, is getting less than 7 hours of actual sleep. Keep in mind, I need more because I've got these nasty genes. So I need a 9-hour sleep window to get 8 hours actual. The average individual, 7 to 9, somewhere in that range. So we need to create this daytime signaling so that we've got this 16-hour waking day and then an 8-hour sleep window to get a minimum of 7 hours actual. That's sort of the blueprint for the baseline. In order to do that, if you're wondering, you've really got to begin preparing for sleep about 2 hours before your intended bedtime. And you want to be as routine as possible with that. And the preparation is, winding down, still being active, but not exercising, just winding the day down, and blue blocking, as I keep showing. And your meal time, your final meal of the day should be happening 4 to 5 hours before your bedtime. And that's the inconvenient truth that most of us are wrong. So the challenge is to understand this. We really, for optimal health and performance, we need a meal window that is 8 hours and a 16-hour fast. We're nowhere near that on the average individual. And a 16-hour waking day with an 8-hour sleep window. That's the recipe that we need to work toward. And it's really just a function of understanding circadian rhythms and what drives sleep health to be able to get to that.
And that's ironic because most people would tell you if they're going to do a fast and say they do that 8-hour window of feeding versus the 16 hours of fasting, it's reverse of what you're saying because people will skip breakfast and they won't eat until noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they eat in that 8-hour window, but then you've got a basically 2-hour gap before you're going to bed.
Correct.
So
what they're doing, that fasting, intermittent fasting, it's important. They just have the timing a bit off. It's still going to the 16-hour fast that they're doing is still going to enhance health. Like it's definitely better to do that than have, say, a 14-hour window that you're eating. So that's definitely important. But thinking about circadian rhythms for a second, you got day, and when we have that meal time and we put it this way, we are getting out of sync. And so you're absolutely right. We want first light and first mealtime to be paired so that both pacemakers are synchronized to the same beginning of day. And so you'd be better off having your first meal at 8 in the morning, for example, and then finishing your final meal at 4. And what you really want is to have the majority, the largest part of your food intake be the first 2 meals, breakfast and lunch, and then have a smaller dinner. And the reason for that is what you want is to understand that, food is supposed to be for metabolic need.
Yeah.
We are supposed to use the food we eat. And so having the biggest meal in front of the most active part of our day is what we're designed for. And then having the smallest meal in advance of our most sedentary part is the recipe. So that's a absolute key, managing meal times and being able to get to that where you've got a 16-hour fast that's properly timed is fundamental.
Yeah, try telling people that food is for metabolic and not for enjoyment, and then you're going to get, man, you will get tarred and
Hammered.
feathered out of a room, won't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, people will say, well, how could I possibly get that food in and, have a smaller dinner? How can I possibly do that? Dinner is our social time. That's, having a meal together is what we do as a family or with our friends. It's a huge shift. And I can really only tell you the science, and the science is pretty clear on this. We should be eating early and fasting later in the day. And so it's a key change that we need to look at. But if you're wondering, I mean, just look at the rates of acid reflux. Look at how people are having these big meals and then they're going horizontal and they're laying down and they're all that food and the acids are wearing away, the valves. And it's a function of us doing things backwards, not how we evolved for optimal health and performance. The answer is always thinking about our ancestors and how they evolved and where optimal health and performance evolved so that we can get back to that. It's a function of, and let me be very clear about this too. I'm sure there's people in your audience that have been watching what they eat. Yeah, they're eating healthier than what they once did. And yet they may find that they're not losing weight. And they could be, doing the fast at an incorrect time, for example. Let me be very clear. We all know what we need to do, right? We need to exercise. We need to eat right. We need to get lots of sleep. Those are the whats. But what many people don't understand is that it's not just what you do that matters. It's when you do these things that matters as much, or I would argue in cases, more. It's critical for us to understand that you could have a healthy diet. You could be eating healthy foods, but if you're eating them at a time when your brain and body isn't ready to use the food, more of that food, healthy food, is going to fat and blood sugar, which is toxic for the brain and the body. So when you do this matters as much or more than what you do. If you're going to have cheats and have unhealthy food, I'm not saying that that's the best thing to do, but if you do, doing it at a time when your brain and body is ready to digest that food and ready to use that food, that is much better than, my weakness is potato chips. I love potato chips. And I'm very often, wanting to punish a bag of chips 2 hours before it's bedtime. I mean, that honestly has always been a great weakness for me. Now, I'm starving for that bag of chips at that time. I'm not starving for, a salad. At that point, I am thinking about the Doritos that are in the cupboard that are just sitting there waiting for me to open them up. And when I say punish a bag, not take much for me to finish a bag. And so the thing that was a game changer for me was learning that, and this is the science, but when we're sleep deprived, when we go beyond the 16-hour waking day that we're designed for, we engage the sympathetic nervous system. It is that system, as you know, it's a system that's designed for, freeze, fight, or flight, superhuman performance. It prepares us for a brief period of superhuman performance. And the thing that we have in today's society is that we're engaging it chronically. When we engage that system beyond what it's designed for, again, brief periods of superhuman performance. But if we go night after night, day after day with long days and short sleeps, we are engaging that system. And when we do that, our brain sends us a signal that says, I'm starving. I'm hungry. It's actually bedtime. And actually that signal is saying, you're tired. You need to get sleep. But if you're not going to go to bed, then you need to get me some high calorie dense foods like carbs, fat rich, sugar. And so your brain actually sends a signal, and it's the Doritos that you want to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned that what I needed to do was I needed to have the discipline. My brain would say, man, let's get those Doritos. And then I had to say, no, I'm not hungry. I've had enough food. In fact, I'm just about to go to bed. So I do not need this food right now. I am not going to be able to use that food right now. I need to actually get ready and get to bed. But when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to punish that bag of Doritos. And so I'd get up in the morning, not having had that bag of Doritos. I'd get to bed, get my sleep. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd go open up the cupboard and I'd look at that bag of Doritos. I remember the first time I opened it and I was like, this is not what I want to eat right now. Even though in my mind I'd said, oh, tomorrow I'm going to punish that bag. My brain was rested and it said, that's the last thing I want to eat right now.
Right.
So once I started to win that battle where I didn't eat right before bed, started getting sleep better, it had a huge impact. I lost, without even trying to lose weight. I did. I lost at its peak, I lost 30 pounds. And I had sort of gained those pounds. I wasn't really obese, but I had gained those pounds, I'd say 10 pounds a decade, So from 30 to 40, gained a sizable amount. Then from 40 to 50, gained another another 10 pounds. And so I was really, I would say 30 pounds I could afford to lose without, looking like I really needed to, I guess is what I would say. A little bit more weight in the neck.
Right.
And that was certainly having an impact on something we should talk about eventually, which is sleep apnea. So I managed to, by being more active during the day and getting my meal intake earlier in the day and avoiding those carbs and the Doritos at night, it had a profound change.
So all of that plays into and affects that circadian rhythm. So I guess what's the basis? How do we understand circadian rhythm? How does a lay person understand what circadian rhythms are and how it affects our body and what is our body doing, our brain doing when we actually sleep?
Yeah, that's a great question. All right. So I think the way to think about this, I've mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the brain's like an engine. It's producing exhaust. So from the moment that we wake up, we're building up this exhaust and we're building up a sleep need. And then I mentioned we're really designed for a 16-hour waking day and then an 8-hour sleep to get a sleep window to get 7 hours of actual sleep. Now, if that's homeostasis, right? You build up a sleep need, then you get to sleep and you dissipate that sleep need. That's homeostasis. Same thing with a thermostat in a room. When the room gets too hot, air conditioner comes on to cool the room. If the room gets too cold, the heater comes on to keep it at a comfy set point.
Right.
That's homeostasis. Now, if homeostasis was the only thing that drove our sleep-wake need, we'd actually be able to sustain, let's say, 4 hours of wakefulness, and then we'd get tired and we'd start to doze off. And then we'd be able to sleep for a little bit, maybe an hour. and then we'd be awake. And what would happen is if that was the only mechanism that drove sleep wake, then during the day, we would actually end up, with a very fragmented waking day.
Mhm.
Our waking day would be interrupted by frequent bouts of sleep. It'd be like a cat, during the day, it's awake for a bit, but you also see it's napping quite a bit. Then at night, in the same way that the cat would sleep for a bit, but then be awake, the nighttime sleep window would be interrupted by frequent bouts of wakefulness.
Mhm.
Now, it turns out that's exactly what we see in Alzheimer's disease. In Alzheimer's disease, you have this almost entirely homeostatic sleep wake, where their waking day is interrupted by frequent bouts of sleeping, and then their nighttime sleep is interrupted by frequent bouts of waking. The reason is because they become circadian dysregulated. Here's where circadian rhythms come in. During the day, from the time that it is time to wake up, actually, about 90 minutes before that, circadian rhythms kick in and there's a cortisol rise that begins about 90 minutes before we normally wake up, preparing the brain and body for that awakening. And so from the point that we wake up, we've had our sleep. If we got a good, healthy sleep, we've washed away the day's waste. Sleep literally washes away that exhaust, as well as doing a ton of stuff that we'll touch on in a moment. But when we wake up, we're now building a sleep need. Every hour that we're up and sustaining that wakefulness, we're building a sleep need. But circadian rhythms are increasingly driving for wakefulness. So they're opposing that buildup of sleep need. So our experience is that we feel cognitive alert and we're able to do all the things we need to do. Until from the time that we wake up, we feel quite alert if we're getting good sleep health, I should say. But we'll feel alert for about 6 hours. And then after about 6 hours, we have this afternoon lull. So imagine you're getting up at 7. By about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, this is where we're reaching for caffeine or different things because we feel this dip, this
Mhm.
cognitive lull. Well, that is the circadian. What I want you to think of is that circadian rhythms during the day drive hard for wakefulness. So they're on the gas pedal because they have to match the building sleep need, the homeostatic sleep need that's building as we've been awake and sustaining wakefulness. At about the 6 hour point from where we woke up, about that point, general speaking, that's when this afternoon lull hits. And what I would say is the circadian rhythm doesn't get on the brake pedal, but it just lifts off the gas. And what it's doing when it lifts off the gas is it's just allowing us to have a nap, to bleed off any excess sleep need that we may have accumulated because we weren't getting proper sleeps or maybe we were doing a lot more. So that afternoon lull is a siesta time. It is a
Right.
time when we were supposed to be napping. And in North American culture, we've eliminated that nap. But we evolved to have an afternoon nap in the midday heat. And so there is this timing that needs to happen where we could have a nap at that point. And if you're wondering, what that right time is, you can take the time that you normally wake up, add 6 hours. That's when this nap window opens. And then the time that you go to bed. So let's say 8 hour sleep window, go to bed at 11, get up at 7. Subtract 6 hours from the 11 o'clock bedtime. And that's when the nap window closes. So using those round numbers, 11 o'clock bedtime, 7 o'clock wake up, a nap window of about 1 to 5 in the afternoon is where we could schedule the nap. Now, I'm not saying sleep from 1 to 5. That wouldn't
Right.
be a nap. That would be daytime sleep. Great time for sleep if you're a shift worker, mind you.
Mhm.
And we'll touch on that a little bit later. But the point there is that from the hours of 1 to 5, that's a great time to take a nap. What is a nap? Well, if you're not a shift worker and you just have some sleep need that you need to dissipate, then I would say the sweet spot's about 45 minutes. You don't want to sleep more than 90 minutes during that nap window. Otherwise, you're likely going to be taking away from your nighttime sleep, the ability to get the sleep you need at night. But a lot of us can't find 45 minutes, if that's the sweet spot. And what I would say is that even 10 minutes, a power nap that people talk about, can be beneficial to just refresh, if you will, or reboot the system. And so that's, as long as it's properly timed and in the right window, naps can be hugely beneficial. So now, after that nap window closes, circadian rhythms then get hard on the gas pedal again. In fact, those 3 hours before our normal bedtime, so, let's use round numbers again. So 11 o'clock bedtime, the hours from really 7 to 10, those hours there are intended to be a wake maintenance zone where circadian rhythms are driving super hard for wakefulness so that we can extend the waking day to the proper bedtime. Remember, imagine we haven't had a nap. We've been awake now for 16 hours. We've built up a massive sleep need, but we haven't gone to bed, and circadian rhythms are driving super hard so that we can make it to that proper bedtime. Earlier, I talked about older adults and how they'll fall asleep in the comfy couch in those hours before bedtime. And that, if they do doze off, physiologically, they're getting into, the early stages of sleep. If they do that, they're dissipating some sleep need, which is going to impact their ability to get a healthy sleep at night.
Right.
If we have strong circadian rhythms, it's a wake maintenance zone that's driving hard for wakefulness during that time when we couldn't fall asleep. That was the thing that was happening when I was a teenager. I could not fall asleep because I had this really strong wake maintenance zone. And then I was getting light and studying and doing things that was actually causing me to take a night owl tendency and make it even more of a night owl, if you will. Okay, so wake maintenance zone kicks in. This is all about circadian rhythms. Wake maintenance zone kicks in those few hours just before a normal bedtime. And then circadian rhythms come off the gas pedal and say, okay, it's time for bed. We built up this massive sleep need. So homeostasis says, okay, big sleep need. And then it takes about 4 hours. So if we've got a 16-hour waking day, it takes about 4 hours for that homeostatic sleep pressure to dissipate.
Mm-hmm.
But keep that in mind. It only takes about 4 hours for the homeostatic sleep pressure to almost all of it to dissipate after 16 hours of wakefulness. And so during that time, let's talk about circadian rhythms and talk about what sleep architecture looks like. That stage of sleep in the front half, those first 4 hours, a lot of that time is spent in deep sleep, slow wave sleep. Deep sleep washes the brain, grows, repairs, restores tissues throughout the brain and body, builds immune system functioning. So it's very important that we get that sleep. Those are, if you will, washing the brain and body. Then the next 4 hours of sleep in that 8-hour sleep window, the next 4 hours is a lot of time spent alternating from light sleep into REM sleep. Light sleep is important because it processes the day. There's a ton of information. Some of it's really important for future success. Most of it we can just disregard. And so what light sleep does is prioritizes what must be remembered for future success and what we can forget about. It also plays a really important role in processing the day, acquiring skills.
Mm-hmm.
So consolidating learning and memory for skill acquisition. Think muscle memory, think getting into the zone. So I work with athletes. These athletes need to be able to execute on their mechanics, but without thinking. So processing, read and react. Getting into the zone is really being able to play without thought, being able to be instinctive. That is muscle memory, and that's light sleep.
Is that also where we would see the processing of traumatic events?
No.
Okay.
That's REM sleep.
Okay.
So and processing the day. So in that back half, we're alternating light sleep with REM sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And REM sleep is that dream stage of sleep. Okay. And now you've asked a really important question. REM sleep is critical. It's consolidating learning and memory, but not for skill acquisition, more for knowledge acquisition, being able to remember important things, dates, times, places, facts. That's REM. And REM is also really important for creativity and creative problem solving. So if you've ever been perseverating in a problem, you couldn't think of the solution, and then you woke up and you suddenly had this epiphany, REM sleep is a key part of that. Now, you mentioned trauma, and first responders are facing more trauma in say a week or a month's worth of shifts than most of us hopefully would in an entire lifetime. And what I would say is that for your first responders, they're arriving on scene. They're on scene for, a patient's worst day of their lives. But it's just another day for a first responder. They have a job to do, and they've got to get through, assessing and executing on their training to save lives. The issue for a first responder, though, is that the brain is still processing that traumatic event.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard of this analogy that it's a backpack. We carry this backpack with us to each traumatic event, and we take a rock from that event and we put it in our backpack. And we do this without even thinking about it. It's just a part of processing. And so what can happen is that as long as we get the REM sleep we need, we can empty that backpack as we go. But if we don't get that REM sleep, that backpack is accumulating weight. Each event is just another weight upon us. And eventually we can get to the point where that weight is just more than we can carry. And if you're thinking about, well, what was the event that was the straw that broke the camel's back? It's maybe no different than any other event. Like when we're talking about processing trauma for first responders, there are first responders that will have a specific traumatic event that was just too much, and they can key in on that, and they can, this is multifactorial, but think team-based care. You can have therapists that are helping. There's medications that can be helpful. And there's also being able to get healthy sleep so that we can process that. But what can happen for some first responders is that the act of dreaming can be terrifying. And so just sleeping becomes a problem for them because they don't want to, because it's just going to be another, think of it as sympathetic overdrive, but another traumatic event. And so EMDR can be very helpful. And you talked about Ben. EMDR can be very helpful so that you can process this trauma and be able to get some REM processing in a safe environment so that later you can get the sleep you need and be able to make it through and process it. But REM sleep is critical for removing the negative emotional tag from each of those events, because each traumatic event is a new learning event. It's just a new learning event with a sympathetic nervous system tag attached to it, a negative emotional adrenaline response attached to it. REM allows us to process that event, remove the negative sympathetic overdrive component to it so that we can learn from the event. We could be triggered by that event without going into fight or flight.
That makes sense. Hey guys, quick break right here just to check in and thank each of you for listening to the show. Your support has been paramount, and I appreciate all of you. I have one request, though. I need you to share the show with everyone you know. Help me get the word out and spread these stories as far and as wide as we can. While you're at it, please leave a review of the show wherever you happen to listen. Feel free to reach out to me at any time to share your story, to talk, or to pass on suggestions. Let's get on with the rest of the show.
So, finishing up on circadian rhythms for a second, I realize I took you on a long.
No, I love it.
So we know how important REM sleep is. Well, REM sleep is phase locked to the end of our sleep window. It's actually tied to circadian rhythms and core body temperature. At the time, you remember I said that we have this wake maintenance zone just before we normally go to bed. That's a circadian driven wake maintenance zone. Our core body temperature is actually ramping up very high and peaking just before we go to bed. Then at the time we go to bed, core body temperature begins declining, and it goes from our highest point of the 24-hour day to just the 2-3 hours before our normal wake up time, its lowest point. So in a sleep window, we're going from an absolute peak in body temperature to our lowest point. And around that core body temperature minimum is a peak in REM. REM sleep is phase locked, if you will, to that. And so just before our normal wake up time, we're getting a ton of REM, and that's important for us. During that point, it's phase locked to this core body temperature minimum, and then everything begins ramping up and getting ready for our waking day, and circadian rhythms then begin processing. But during that core body temperature minimum, we have what's called a sleep maintenance zone. So it's a circadian driven sleep maintenance zone. You could think of it as, whereas in the wake maintenance zone, circadian rhythms were driving hard on the gas pedal to drive wakefulness. In that 3-4 hours before our normal wake up time, circadian rhythms are driving hard for sleep by getting hard on the brake pedal. Notice that homeostatic sleep need is dissipated. We've been asleep for 4 hours. We've got our deep sleep. We've dissipated most of that need, but we haven't done everything that sleep needs to do. And so circadian rhythms drive super hard for sleep at that time by getting on the brake. So circadian rhythms are daily biological rhythms that do time of day dependent mechanisms, driving hard for wakefulness when it's appropriate to do so, driving hard for sleep when it's appropriate to do so that we can have a 16-hour waking day with unimpaired performance, with the exception of a nap window, and then an 8-hour sleep window to get 7 hours of actual sleep, extending the sleep so that we get everything that we need. That's a pretty good summary of what circadian rhythms do.
Yeah, they're busy. To put it bluntly, they're busy, and we can screw them up so easily.
Yes.
And we are, as firefighters or as paramedics or cops or whatever, shift workers or 24-hour workers, we're destroying those rhythms by our exposure to certain things, food, light, everything you mentioned. We do wrong in the firehouse.
Yeah, by getting the timing wrong, we turn night into day and day into night. And so we flatten out these circadian rhythms, and we end up with a weak wake maintenance zone and a weak sleep maintenance zone. And so what happens is we become entirely homeostatic. So we're able to sustain a brief period of wakefulness with unimpaired performance, and then we get foggy. And at night, we're able to sustain a brief period of sleep, and then we wake up and we can't get back to sleep. So we're not getting the sleep that we need. Now, touched on something. When you talk about exposure, I want to talk about firefighters for a moment, because there is a great deal of understanding now that, well, there's a couple of things. The first I'm going to talk about is cancer rates. Cancer rates are through the roof for firefighters, as you know. And a lot of that is thought to be a function of exposure to carcinogens. And certainly that's true. So there's a great deal of focus now on helping firefighters reduce their exposure. But I want you to understand melatonin for a moment. We haven't talked about that. Circadian rhythms, melatonin is a hormone that begins rising a couple of hours before a normal bedtime, as long as we are blue blocking.
Right.
Okay. But light turns off melatonin. That's an important thing. Melatonin is actually a day length signal. And so as long as there's light, it turns off melatonin. But if we have darkness at the right times, then melatonin is allowed to get this high amplitude circadian rhythm. So day is low, near zero melatonin levels, and night, 2 hours before it begins rising, and it peaks in the middle of our sleep window. Melatonin is really important because It prepares the brain and body for sleep. It prepares the brain for sleep by playing a role in turning off wake-promoting areas of the brain, turning on sleep-promoting areas of the brain. That's important. For people that, have that busy brain, or for me, night owl, that could not get to sleep. I didn't have the mechanism. I wasn't protecting my light exposure and making sure that I had darkness at night. So melatonin levels were not ramping up on schedule. And so I couldn't turn off that busy brain. I like to think of it as getting the hamster out of the wheel. The
Right.
hamster's running in the wheel. It's thinking, and I need to get the hamster out of the wheel so that I can be ready for sleep. Melatonin prepares the brain for sleep by turning off wake promoting areas of the brain. It's a part of that process.
Right.
Turning off wake promotion, turning on sleep promotion. That's one thing it's doing. Second thing is it's preparing the body for sleep by beginning and playing a role in the cooling. Remember I said that the temperature rhythm is at a peak before our normal bedtime, and then it begins dipping and it gets this long decline to our lowest point. Melatonin plays a role in that. So those are two very important things that melatonin does. The third is melatonin plays a role in the cancer fighting mechanisms that happen during our sleep. So we produce cancer cells as a normal course of daily living, but we have natural processes that are there to identify the cancer cell, to target those cancer cells for destruction, to destroy them, and then to clear them from our body. We literally pee them out in the morning. And so firefighters, sure, they're exposed to more carcinogens, but if they aren't getting the sleep that they need, and if they don't have high melatonin levels at night, if they don't have the melatonin, then what's happening is that, yes, they have greater exposure, but we're also impairing their capacity to fight that cancer.
Yeah.
And so a key thing, and in 2010, the World Health Organization, after a thorough review of the science, determined that shift work that causes us to turn our nights into days and our days into nights actually causes cancer. It's not just a correlation, it's causal. And one of the key drivers, it's multifactorial, but one of the key drivers is suppression of melatonin at night that impairs cancer fighting mechanisms. So we need to understand that this exposure, by flattening out circadian rhythms, by turning night into day and day into night, we're impairing our capacity not just to sleep, but our capacity to get healthy mental health, our capacity to actually produce health in terms of the long-term health. What I would say is we're accelerating aging and we're impairing our cancer fighting. Let me be very clear. And I work with people worldwide now. And these individuals, very often when they come to me, they've tried everything and nothing works. They're really struggling with their sleep. But they'll say, Glenn, I don't have time for sleep. I'll sleep when I'm dead. And let me be very clear. The truth about this is that if that is your mentality, that, you're young and that you've got these things to do and you've got to be there for your brothers and your sisters, what you're doing if you're not getting the sleep you need is you are borrowing from the health and wellness of your out years. If you're going beyond that 16-hour waking day, you are engaging the sympathetic nervous system to provide what was designed to be brief periods of superhuman performance, and you're overworking that system. And that means you're accumulating a debt, and that debt must be paid. You may feel that you can do it now. The brain is remarkably complex. We have the ability to compensate for a long time. That's a decades-long process. But it actually has a debt that's accruing, and we are going to have to pay the piper eventually. And that is in the out years. And you will get there much faster than you intended. And those final years, those 10 to 15 years, are not going to be health span that you may live that long, but you're not going to be healthy and be able to make the most of what you did. And so that is really important for people to understand. Now that's a decades long process,
Right.
But there's one thing I want, your audience to understand. they may feel like they're functioning, that they're doing what they're able to function on less sleep. And a lot of your audience probably say, well, I'm one of those special individuals that doesn't need, 7 hours actual, that I function best on 4 or 5 hours of sleep.
Hear it all the time.
Right. And so for that group, I want them to please give me a moment. If you are one of those people that say, well, Glenn, when I sleep like 8 hours, I feel like crap. I don't feel good. I feel worse. What I want them to understand is that they've got this sleep accountant, and when they give themselves an extended window to get some recovery sleep, the sleep accountant might tag that and say, okay, let's use it. And so it's going to go into deep restoration mode, if you will. And so when you wake up out of that, you're going to feel awful because you are not coming out of REM sleep. You're coming out of this deeper level of sleep that's restoration mode. So when you wake up and you feel like crap and you're saying to yourself, man, that wasn't good. Actually, that's an indicator that you really desperately needed that sleep. Let me give you another example. You've just gone through a number of shifts and you're burning the candle at both ends and you're, just trying to survive. And then you finally get some off time. And let's say that you got some vacation. You go on vacation. And now you're sleeping for a bit. And all of a sudden, what happens to most of us? We get sick.
Yep.
So you've been burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah.
And then you finally get a recovery time where you want to be able to enjoy your vacation. And what happens? You get sick. That is your body in recovery mode, trying to repair the damage that was done. And so your immune system and all of that, it's working in parasympathetic mode.
Right.
And so that's, an example of we need the sleep that I'm telling you that you need to get. And if you don't, you're really borrowing. Now that's a long-term process. But now let's just briefly cover the impacts that it doesn't take near as long. And that is, let's say that you put 3 short nights together, 3 successive nights of, let's say, an hour less sleep than what you were designed to get. That's the equivalent to pulling 1 all-nighter, round numbers here. And so what happens when we go night after night? The brain's like an engine. It's producing exhaust and it's building from the front and moving its way back. It's like a tsunami, a wave of toxicity that's moving its way back. And so each night that we go, that front part of our brain, that front part is really important. It is the CEO of the brain. It is the brake pedal, if you will. Now we have 2 gas pedals. We have many, but I'm going to give you an example of 2. One is, think of the amygdala, the emotional center of our brain. I'm simplifying, but you can think of this. The amygdala is the emotional cortex or the emotional center of our brain, and it is a gas pedal. And when we are sleep deprived, even 3 nights in a row, the equivalent of doing an all-nighter, when we do that, we disconnect the brake pedal. It becomes impaired. So the brake pedal that is our executive function, reason, logic, decision-making, all of that brake pedal becomes non-functional. And so now we become all gas with our emotions. It impairs our ability to control our emotions. Think anger management. I'll give you an example. Parents have young children. They're in the mall and they're with their child, and their child decides now is the time they are going to die on this hill. They want an ice cream, and they decide if they don't get their ice cream, they are going to pitch a fit. Now, the parent is embarrassed. They're in a public place and their child is screaming, and they're like, oh, not now, please. But they're not calling psych services. They know. They talk to their child and they say, it's going to be okay. You just need to have a nap. We know as parents instinctively that we've overcooked the kid. They've been up for too long. They didn't get a nap.
Right.
And so they need a nap or else they're just going to become super reactive. All right. Interesting point. As parents, we instinctively know that. We can see it in our children. But for ourselves, like a slow descending fog, we don't notice it. And so I don't know why, but as adults, we seem to think we don't need that nap. If we are chronically sleep depriving ourselves, we absolutely need the nap, or else we aren't going to have the anger management that we need. And so that's a key thing. We can see this, and we see it play out everywhere now. People are moodier than they ever were.
Yeah.
They're more difficult to deal with. We are sleep depriving. This is what I would call a silent pandemic. It is worldwide. Epidemiological studies show it. Wearable tech shows it, whether it's an Oura Ring or a Fitbit. You can see that sleep durations are really short. We're not getting the same sleep architecture and the same sleep quality that we need. So it's having an impact on our emotional reactivity. That's one component. But there's another gas pedal, and that is the reward center of the brain that I was talking about earlier. It's a gas pedal. It is that adrenaline junkie.
Mm-hmm.
It is that risk appetite. And what happens when we are chronically sleep deprived, and we can see it after just a few nights of short duration sleep, what happens is that our risk tolerance increases. We actually underestimate the risk of a given decision and overestimate the benefit of that decision.
Yes.
So the risk reward analysis is impaired. And so what happens is that when you're looking at this, supervisors look and they'll say, you are not executing on the training. What were you thinking? Like, how did you make that decision? That was ridiculous. Way too risky. And you're ignoring, what's the benefit here? There's no need for us to be doing this. You are not executing on the training. What I want your audience to understand is that we aren't who we think we are when we are chronically sleep deprived. And it doesn't take decades for that impact to play out. Another thing, in terms of our ability to cope with stress and trauma, what happens when we're sleep deprived? This is a third factor, but little things become big things when we're sleep deprived. Things that wouldn't normally bother us, tasks that we, delay and we don't want to do. They might be just an inconvenience, but when we're sleep deprived, it becomes overwhelming,
Right.
and it's us from being able to execute on those things. So the impact of poor sleep health, there are definitely, a decades-long process that's going to impact the health and wellness of your out years. But there's also profound impacts that happen to us, a slow descending fog, if you will, that we see. We're not who we're trained to be, and we're definitely not our best selves when we're sleep deprived.
It's funny because as you explain this, firefighters, losing a little bit of sleep and becoming, losing that lack of judgment or chasing the fun, basically, and ignoring the risk versus the reward. Anyone that is a firefighter or has had any kind of a relationship with a firefighter goes, yeah, now I see it, because that's what they're known for, right? Is we make boneheaded decisions because it's just not operating normal for us right now.
Yeah. And can I just say, we have a tendency to blame the victim. And what I mean by that is the individual that made the poor decision will say, well, that was their fault. They
Right.
just didn't execute on the training. They did something stupid. We need to understand, and this is critical. When people come to the service, they're well-intentioned. We need to provide people training so that they can execute on the training.
Right.
We need to understand that, and this is why we have the Surviving Shift Work Training Program. It's an online program. It's 10 lessons. Think of it as Netflix for sleep health, but it's designed to give shift workers, it's called Surviving Shift Work for a reason. It's designed to give shift workers everything they need to know about circadian rhythms and sleep.
Right.
So that they can work a shift, but remove the circadian shifting out of it and anchor to the day. So stay day is day versus nighttime cues. You still have to work at night, but how you manage those light exposure, meal times, all of that can allow us to continue and maintain high amplitude circadian rhythms as best you can within the shift system, so that they can execute on the training, so that they can protect their sleep and get like, yes, there's going to be nights where there's going to be short duration sleep. But if you do that, if you've got strong circadian rhythms, we have processes that can balance the books. They can, on your next recovery night, you can rebound and recover. So what's happening is we're flattening out circadian rhythms. And so those systems that are designed to balance the books, they simply can't. And so it's constantly putting out fires. You put this fire out and then another one is, started up. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul, that kind of a situation. And understanding that we need deep light and REM and we need to get them in the proper, sleep architecture. Well, we accumulate a deep sleep debt. We pay off that deep sleep at the expense of light and REM. And so it's constantly having an impact. We need, bottom line, education, training, understanding that these people that are putting their lives on the line, they need more tools. They need more information and training so that they can continue to do what they have dedicated their lives to do. And let me be very clear about this too. If you do not plan properly to take a knee when you are designed to, when you have to, you will end up taking a knee at a time you didn't intend to. And that is, if we're talking about being there and being able to answer the bell, well, sometimes you got to get the rest and recovery so that you are capable, you are able. And what I work with athletes and they're training all the time.
Right.
And one of the things I have to do is work with coaches to get the coaches to understand that the time that they spend in the gym, that time is not building muscle. Okay. In fact, it's tearing muscle down. That time in the gym is sending the brain and the body a signal that says, hey man, these muscles are getting work. These bones need to grow. These muscles need to grow. The tendons need to repair. Ligaments need to repair. It's actually sleep that grows and repairs and restores these tissues. So there used to be this notion that practice makes perfect. And, biomechanics came in and they said, it's perfect practice that makes perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got news for everybody. It's sleep that prepares the brain and body for a new learning event and training, plus perfect practice, plus sleep that grows, repairs, restores, consolidates the training and builds muscle memory and all of that. It's sleep plus perfect practice plus sleep that makes perfect. And so these firefighters, they need to understand that in order to be their best, they've got to carve out enough time to make sure that they get the sleep they need.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because the department I was in, our schedule is you work a 24-hour shift, you get 24 off. You work 24, you get 24 off. You work another 24, then you get 4 days off. And so most people can't afford to live in the county that they worked in. So you live an hour, 45 minutes to an hour away, and the expectation is that you get there half hour to 45 minutes before your shift starts. So now you're pushed it back an hour and a half for a 6 a.m. start time. So you're looking at, some people are getting up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning to go to a 6 o'clock shift that runs to 6 o'clock the next morning, but you're up at around 5 or 5:15 to get ready for shift change. And then you're back up again at 3:30 or 4 the next morning. And that's just assuming that you don't get calls while you're on shift. And so now you see that pattern. You see now what's happening to the sleep window. Yeah. So I guess my general question is, are these firefighters doomed?
No. So let's be clear. So every shift system will have its pluses and minuses. And the 24-hour shift system, that definitely has some minuses, right? Like it's hard to do. And what I would say is that call utilization rate is a major determining factor on whether or not that shift system is going to be a big plus or a big minus.
Okay.
So let's start with a 24-hour shift system where you don't have the high call utilization rate. So they will have bed facilities for, the firefighter to be able to get sleep at night when they aren't on a call. And so that system is actually a great system for sleep health if you don't have very high call utilization rates, because in terms of anchoring circadian rhythms, and let's be clear about what we're trying to achieve, we want to have strong daytime signals and strong nighttime signals so that our circadian rhythms are able to stay synchronized to them. And so it is possible to, and let me be clear, I'm not going to be able to provide, a detailed recipe in a podcast, but we do have Surviving Shift Work, the training program, online, available to anybody that, has an internet connection, where you can access this training. And that training provides a recipe for how you subtract the daytime signal from a nighttime shift and how you can anchor your circadian rhythms. So the key is really knowing how to manage light exposure, physical activity, and meal times around that. And the beauty of the 24-hour shift system is that you can keep your breakfast the same, your dinner the same. And so the meal window, with the exception of this, what you want is, if you've had a particularly rough night where there was a lot of calls, then you want to use your circadian driven afternoon lull to recover that sleep. And so what you do during the day is, if you didn't get the sleep at night, you want to use the day to get sleep, but in a way that doesn't disrupt circadian rhythms. And so the key is to understand that circadian lull and how to schedule a sleep that begins a couple, 2-3 hours before the afternoon lull and then extends through it. Different shift system where you have like 2 nights, and then, imagine a shift system where you've got 2 days, 2 nights, and 4 off.
Right.
It's different than what you just asked, but the challenge is what they do between those 2 night shifts. For a 24-hour, what you really want to do is stay as best you can day and night, and sleep as much as you can during the night shift, and be getting strong daytime cues during the day shift. But then when you have a particularly rough night, you need to, as best you can, recover during the day, properly timed. So there's a lot that goes into this. Again, can't really cover it in. And the other thing is, those 4 offs where
Right.
what a firefighter does on those 4 offs has a huge impact. So the truth is that you could have, let's say, 100 firefighters on the 24. Not one of them is going to be working the same shift system, because what you do on those 4 offs has a huge impact on what that lived experience is for that shift system. And so it's really important that we provide training so that they can apply the science to their specific lived experience. It's not that I'm trying to avoid answering the question, but I am trying to make sure that I don't add fuel to a fire. And, it is important that they get the science as it applies to their specific lived experience.
So is it better as a firefighter that has a rough night, you get banged out 5-6 times in the middle of the night and your sleep was just pure shit? Is it better to stay, to ramp up those daytime hours early, like you were saying? So you blue light, and then during that nap window sleep, or sleep in the morning?
Yeah, it's such an important question. So it's going to vary on the individual to an extent. But what I would say is the recipe is they come off the 24, or they come off in the morning, and this is supposed to be the beginning of day for them, but they missed a night of sleep. Okay. But this is the beginning of day for them. So it's important for them to get food, to get light, and to get activity in those first few hours that say, hey, it's still day.
Right.
Even though you had this night, this is still day.
Right.
And then after, coming home at 6 a.m, have their mealtime the same, their light exposure, their activity, all of that. And then what they should be doing, so they're still trying to burn, don't do any safety critical things, like don't, avoid the, long haul drive or whatever it might be. Avoid safety critical because they're going to be fatigued.
Right.
No question. And it's it's a risk window.
Mm-hmm.
But if they get their food, their light, their activity, and then push to, let's say, 9 or 10 in the morning, and then go to sleep and sleep through the afternoon lull, they can get a sleep, finish it at the end of the afternoon lull, get up, get more light, their mealtime, all of that. So what they're doing is they're keeping their breakfast and their dinner the same,
Right.
but they'll sleep through that lunch period. They'll sleep through that to recover, but then get back in the late afternoon up, getting light, getting activity, getting their dinner at the correct time, and staying active into the night, and then getting right back to a nighttime where they can prepare for a regular sleep.
So it's literally just taking advantage of the ramp up for wakefulness, the natural window to kind of have some downtime at that 1 o'clock time frame. And then after that, another natural ramp up. So you're making sure you're taking advantage of all three of those.
Correct. It's maintaining. So even though you got, and let's be clear, they will have gotten some light and some activity
Mm-hmm.
During that night shift. The mistake a lot of firefighters or anybody on the night shift is making is they're eating at night because they're hungry and they feel like they got to feel it. That signal that they have is actually the sympathetic nervous system saying, hey man, you're driving me hard here. You got to feed me. You have to ignore the feeding signal. And what you have to do is actually just be as opportunistic as possible to capture naps. And whenever you can during that time, and then wait until breakfast and then eat. So keeping the meal signal the same on those 24s. Do not eat during that night shift and make it through that night shift as best you can, or minimize the food exposure, if you will, so that you can actually have your breakfast at the correct time and stay anchored to that being your day. Getting lots of light so that it decreases the impact of the nighttime shift. And wherever possible, if it's safe to do so, wear blue blockers at night, except for those hours from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. You remember that I talked about the body temperature minimum? That is a fatigue risk. It's a peak. I actually call it the danger zone. The afternoon lull and the afternoon lull for most of us, say 1 to 5. That afternoon lull and the time from 2 to 6 in the morning is, those are the two danger zones. And first responders know that. That's when they're out.
Yeah.
They're responding to calls. That's where people are falling asleep at the wheel and, not attentive and making, vigilance errors. So those times are a time for a first responder to get light. Anytime you're in that cognitive lull or the fatigue risk zone, you need to get bright light and physical activity, not food, but bright light and physical activity, just so that you can maintain a level of alertness required. Now, for first responders, a lot of it is adrenaline. A lot of it is you're on scene and you're go time. So, you're not at risk so much of falling asleep at that time, but you are at risk of making errors and judgment errors. So you have to be aware of that. And then the other thing that I would say is you want on first responders, you haven't finished the call. You haven't finished the task until you've made it home safe. So understanding that the call ends and now you're at the hall and you're getting ready to go home. And now you've come from a high into that fatigue risk zone. And it's like, it's not falling from a normal level. You are falling from a cliff.
Yeah.
And so one needs to really be aware that as soon as you're driving home, that, the system is saying, okay, and it's taking a breath. And that is where you're at greatest risk for falling asleep and not making it home safe, or just not being able to respond appropriately to the unexpected.
So I took a couple of notes as we were talking, and do you have time to hear what I wrote down?
Yeah.
First, I'm just curious, your natural sleep window, you said you're night owl. Is is that necessarily bad?
Being a night owl?
Yeah, like if that's where you function and put society aside, because I'm not saying it's you fit into society like you were saying with exams and such, but
Yeah.
is it necessarily bad?
No, not necessarily, but I'll tell you where the problem is. Okay, so imagine, so the situation that I had, like, really, I should have been going to bed, let's say 10 to a
Hmm.
sleep window of 10 to 7 or 11 to 8. And eight's probably just sleeping in too late for, I'm 54. I've got two kids.
Hmm.
It's not doable to be sleeping
Right.
that late. But it, if I could, sleeping from, say, midnight to 9 would be, or midnight to 8 for most, that would be okay. Or 1 to 9, that can be fine. The problem is that it's really difficult to stay on that routine.
Right.
There is this notion out there that the hours of sleep before midnight are the best hours, are the most important. And the reason that's true is the brain must be ready for sleep at the time we've scheduled it. And if we get to bed on time when the brain is ready for it, we're going to get into deep sleep quickly. And
Hmm.
deep sleep is really important because the brain's like an engine and deep sleep washes away that toxicity.
Right.
So that's where that's coming from. The answer to your question is what's most important is getting strong day versus nighttime cues. And you could shift it and have a later bedtime. And as long as you're protecting a sleep window all the way to a later wake up time, here's the problem. We got sunlight coming into our
Yeah.
rooms that are saying, ooh, here's day. And when we compress the sleep window because we've got some day signals that are coming in that are beyond our control, or we're not able to be consistent about that. And sometimes we've got to be up early because we got to get the kids to school or we've got other things to do. That's where we get into trouble is that, on the weekends, we push the sleep, or when we have our days off, we push the sleep window a little bit later because we want to actually live life.
Hmm.
And then we're not able to sleep in as well as we'd want to. And we fall into this habit of staying up later, but then not being able to sleep in because the brain's like ready to go. It's
Right.
already programmed and it said, hey, this is go time. And that's, say, for those firefighters, is about 6 a.m. So what can happen is even though we want to sleep in, we can't. And so what happens is sleep compression. That answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I kind of thought that would be the answer. I just curious because some people are just claim to be naturally night owls.
Yeah.
Um, the other one you mentioned is genetic testing, and you talked about having genes that were susceptible to certain diseases and conditions. Is there a suggestion on how to do that, on where to go for that testing?
Oh, great question. Gene screening, I mean, that's evolved quite a bit. It's
Hmm.
definitely outside my lane, and I wouldn't be able to tell people uh, where to go for that. And the accuracy of things like 23andMe, I can't speak to. But there's one thing. This is an interesting point. So knowing that we have these genes, biology is destiny to an
Hmm.
extent. Some people are going to have good genes. Some people are going to have bad genes. But how we live our lives has a huge part in
Yes.
how those genes play out. That's a field called epigenetics.
Hmm.
And so, like I said, I have these really nasty genes, but by protecting my sleep window and getting more sleep than what the average individual needs, I can negate the impact of those genes to an extent. And that's critical. What I would say is assume that you've got the bad genes. If we don't,
Hmm.
if you're willing to spend the money to get a great gene screen, good on you to do that. But if you can't afford that, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, well, what are you going to do if you find out you've got bad genes? And my answer most likely is going to be, you're going to focus on diet. You're going to focus on, physical activity and health, and you're going to focus on improving your sleep. What I would say is you're probably going to want to do that no matter what. So whether or not you get the gene screen to find out what your particular risks are, you should be focused on knowing when to eat, when to exercise, and when to schedule your sleep window. One thing you did mention that, if you are a night owl, then it's going to be very important to prepare your brain and body for sleep by getting blue blocking at night so that you can get to sleep. The mistake I made is that I was taking a natural night owl tendency, and then I was using the night to do things that was making me more of a night owl.
Gotcha.
So understanding this natural tendency and then adjusting so that we can fall asleep and be ready for sleep on time is critical. And some of us are early birds. And if you're an early bird, then it's the opposite.
Yeah.
If you're finding that you are waking up and you can't get back to sleep, then blue blocking in the morning to say it's not day yet. So that you can actually sleep all the way through. That's going to be key. So again, we're all individuals, and how this science applies to us is individual. The thing is to be able to get the science and then learn how to apply that to the individual's lived experience. And of course, that's, what we do.
Yeah.
It is our specialty.
So that one actually leads me into my next question, which was a perfect segue, and you had no idea. I see people wear blue blockers, and maybe not necessarily the orange tinted ones, but they talk about wearing blue blockers all day long. Oh, I'm looking at a screen, so I'm gonna wear my blue blockers, and they start it in the morning and they wear it all the way through. Is that even effective, or is that something they need to stop?
That's an awesome question. Thanks for that. Okay, so what I have on right now are blue blockers.
Okay.
These are my, regular corrective lenses, and they filter out UV. So when we're out and about outside and getting daylight, we're exposed to UV, which is obviously bad. And UV is really bad for our eyes, the retina. It increases our risk of glaucoma and macular degeneration. And so we need to filter out UV. And UV is considered blue light. It's right next to the blue light that is the light that turns off melatonin. They're right next to each other on the spectrum. And so this is a problem that we have, is that we can call these blue blockers and we can call these blue blockers. And what I want people to understand is it's important to protect us during the day for eye strain and things like that, and filter out UV. That's critical. But at night, this is the blue that we want to block out. And so if you're wondering which one to wear when, orange lenses turn on night and turn off day. That's essentially what you need to understand. So if you're a night owl, you need to protect yourself from the nighttime light. And if you're an early bird, the early morning light is what you have to protect yourself from.
Perfect. Thank you. That definitely helps clear up that confusion in my head. The next one was a question about naps, but you hit that right as I wrote it, so I don't need to touch on it. So it was perfect timing. As I wrote it, you got into the nap cycle, and I was like, oh, never mind. And then you talked about that 90 minutes before waking up, and how you're starting to ramp up for the day. Correct? Your body is naturally
begins to rise.
How does losing that affect firefighters? Because that's a time where people go out on calls, and then they don't come back, and they never get back into a sleep cycle after that. So it's almost like my next question is there a better sleep stage to lose, if that makes sense?
Oh, it's a great question. So what I would say is I would focus not on sleep architecture in terms of, well, which stage should I, protect more than any other. What I would say is let your sleep accountant, those physiological processes, figure out what the sleep debt is. And it's tracking it. So let it figure out. This is sort of the problem with hacks, where if you don't mind, let's talk about supplements for a moment.
Yeah.
We talked about why melatonin is so important. But the answer is not to take melatonin before bed, because if you took melatonin before bed, we call it a chronobiotic. It's a time cue. In very much the same way that light and meal times and all of that are time cues. Melatonin itself is a time cue. And if you take melatonin to help you fall asleep before bed, what happens, it's very much once it's metabolized and it's in your system, it shifts your circadian rhythms. It's like taking your internal time and taking it from LA time to New York time in an instant. And so by taking melatonin to help you fall asleep, it advances your circadian rhythms and moves you 3 hours earlier, and it would cause you to wake up earlier and not be able to get back to sleep. So the problem with taking melatonin before bed is that it's going to shrink the sleep window. It's going to compress it. And so that, and I mean, that's if you're getting pharmaceutical grade actual melatonin and it isn't regulated in the same way. It's a supplement. And so yeah, there's no guarantees that you're getting what you think you're getting. Even within a bottle, that each pill could be somewhat different. Plus, you may be getting a lot more than melatonin. And so you don't want to take it. What you want to do is get lots of light, manage your meal times and your physical activity so that you produce a high level of melatonin, high amplitude melatonin, and then protect it by blue blocking so that your body can actually secrete it. So there's an example of one supplement where taking it is going to do more harm than good. But what about other supplements? People are big on their magnesium or whatever it might be. And what I like to explain to people is, that sleep that we get, the deep versus light versus REM, that sleep architecture is best determined by the sleep accountant to balance the books. If you take something that's going to promote more deep sleep, for example, more slow wave sleep, if you take that, you're going to deprive yourself of light and REM because it's promoting more deep. CBD, you might have some anxiety issues or, reasons to take, and CBD, just think weed without the fun. So if you're taking the CBD to deal with other issues, be aware CBD is a potent REM inhibitor. So imagine you're taking it to reduce stress or the impacts of trauma. Well, if you're impairing REM, you're decreasing the ability to actually remove negative emotional tags. So there's so much that we need to understand. And what I would say, getting back to the answer, is that we have to stop thinking in terms of taking a pill to improve our sleep architecture. And we have to start thinking in terms of build a sleep window, protect that sleep window with what we do during the day and at night when we can't sleep, so that we get the sleep we need. Our sleep accountant gets to be unhandcuffed and can balance the books. Now, if we have a dietary deficiency, yes, we should take supplements, but we should take that as part of our food intake window. We should take those supplements in the morning or at very least by the afternoon and not at night before bed.
Yeah. So back to the stages. If you're going to lose a stage, I'm going to guess that it's not a matter of which is better. It's just a matter of happenstance as you're a firefighter and which one you lose. And now that
let your sleep accountant balance the books.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Now that accountant needs to make up that debt somewhere.
Yeah, correct. And let me give you an example. So here's a classic example. So antihistamines. So I have to sometimes take antihistamines because allergy season comes. And recently, for whatever reason, allergy season is coming early and it's coming hard for me. And so I end up having to take, the antihistamines, or else I'm keeping the house up and keeping my wife up, which is definitely. And so I have to take the antihistamine. Well, the antihistamines that I take work, but they actually deprive me of some REM. I see it in my sleep architecture. I don't get as much deep, but I'm definitely missing out on some REM. And so what ends up happening is that I take them for, the 2-3 days, whatever it might be that, it's critical just to get me through the peak. And then what I've seen is that after I come off the antihistamines, the sleep that I have, the rebound is like a huge amount of REM. What I'm trying to tell you is that life gets in the way. Things are going to happen. And it might be that we don't get the deep, or it might be that we don't get the light or the REM. But if we build a sleep window, protect the sleep window, and let our sleep accountant be unhandcuffed and actually balance the books on its own, it will make up for that. It'll change the sleep architecture. As I mentioned earlier, I said no 2 days are the same. Our sleep account is designed to balance the books as needed. And we just have to let it do its job. We're born with the ability to get the sleep we need. Those processes are hardwired. We just have to allow it to work by providing very strong, this is day, and very strong signals that this is night, keep them separated, and let the sleep accountant balance those books. We're designed to be able to make it through, an all-nighter and still be able to recover. The problem is if we flatten out circadian rhythms, can't tell day from night, and it's not able to properly balance the books.
Makes sense. It makes total sense. And the last thing I had was, you mentioned that, that going on vacation where you've been in a debit, you're debit. You go on vacation and your body goes, I can stop fighting now and I can kind of let the guard down. And then you become sick or you're just even more tired once you get sleep. And I think I found that quite a bit. And you and I talked a bit before I hit record, and it was talking about now that I'm out of the fire service, I've had like 10 days of this glorious sleep. So, it looks like 8 hours, 8 hours and 45 minutes. It's just kind of trying to find that natural rhythm again, but I'm still waking up tired.
Give it time.
Yeah. And that's and so it kind of clicks as you start to talk about it. Yes. Give it time. Let your body find the, oh, hold on. Yep, I'm still here. It wanted to kick me off of the. It wanted to kick me off the program. It's fine. So let my body find its natural rhythms and natural homeostasis, as you were talking about, and it'll start to balance out, and then the rewards will come.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know I keep hammering this, but it's about figuring out where's day and where's night, and then providing very strong cues. Say this is day and this is night, keep them separate so that eventually what happens is all those systems will come back in line. So think of it as being out of phase and being the time it takes to get back into phase, and then recovery can begin to happen.
Yeah.
And eventually what happens, another thing that I see with our clients, is that you could go through this process of recovery and, 10, 15 nights, whatever it might be. Then the sleep accountant's like, man, like you've had 2 decades of being here and this is what you've became, accustomed to. And now we've paid off all this. Like, what do you want me to do? Like you've gotten a ton more sleep. You don't. And so you have to keep building it. What I would say is if you build it, sleep will fill it. But there does come a point where you paid off that debt and it's like, are you sure? Do you really want to keep going here? Oh, okay. This is a new normal. This is what we're doing. So you have to build it into the system.
Okay.
So imagine, you're no longer just putting out a fire, but you are now laying the groundwork. You are sowing the seeds for growth, repair, restoration, long-term, so that you'll see that that fog descends and you're like, man, I didn't realize how impaired I was.
Yeah. I've heard that. I've heard people say that before. And so I'm interested in it. I've taken up about 2 hours of your time already. Can I be greedy and ask you 2 more quick questions?
My time is yours.
I like to ask all my guests two questions at the end of a show, and I've changed one of them around. And a listener asked me one time, when was the last time I had a sense of awe? And I like to ask my guests that question specifically. When's the last time you had a sense of awe in your life?
It's got to be family for me. Like, truthfully, I have 2 kids, and when we had kids, people would say, it goes by in a blink. And if I'm being honest with you, those first 8 years did not go by in a blink.
Yeah.
And they were, painful at times and grueling to working professionals trying to raise these kids and find a way to get the bills paid and all of that. And I have to say, it was grueling. But my son just turned 16 this weekend. My daughter's 14, and the sense of awe of watching who they've become. I'm I'm being genuine. It is, and now I just want to push pause because it has gone, those 8 years went by so fast, and now they've become, young adults and they're so much different. And they amaze me every day.
That's perfect, because a lot of people say, "Oh, it was when a child was born," and it still revolves around children, but it's a whole different aspect of children and raising kids.
Yeah.
Seeing
what they can do.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And can I just extend on that too? The world that they are inheriting is, and I'm not making a political statement here, but the world that they're inheriting is a very different world than what I was raised in and my parents before me. And their optimism and their, just youthful exuberance inspires me. When things get big for me, I just look at them and I'm like, well, they're able to get through this. So can we.
It's perfect. And the final question I like to ask people is about a book recommendation. A book that you'd like to recommend to the audience.
I'll give you two. I'll give you one is Why We Sleep. Now, I know we've talked about this a lot, but Dr. Matthew Walker does a nice job of explaining why sleep's so important. I tried to touch on this, and a lot of what is important for us to understand you can get from his book. He does a really nice job of laying out the case for why sleep is so important. And the other book that I would recommend is The Circadian Code. Remember I said that meal times are so important? The Circadian Code by Dr. Sachin Panda does a really nice job of helping us understand that we are outside what we're beyond our limits in terms of what we're designed to do. And we really need to get back to providing really strong cues in terms of circadian rhythms so that, we can make good on that promise. And, people in this day and age, we're looking for supplements. We're looking to optimize in terms of physical fitness and diet and all of these things. And we're looking for hacks. And what I want people to understand is that sleep, and I know that sleep isn't everything, but sleep is honestly an untapped potential as a performance enhancer for us.
Yeah, I think you need to sell it as just the ultimate hack, and then people are going to give you thousands of dollars. So, sir, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You gave generously, and the information you supplied us with is immense, and I hope my audience can put it to use and improve some aspects of their life.
I thank you very much for the time, and believe me, it's not lost on me that your audience was drinking from a fire hose today. There's just so much. I know I'm trying to give people as much as I possibly can in a very short window. And, it does exist. If you're interested in this material, please, check out Surviving Shift Work and, give it the time that it deserves so that you can make good on that promise.
And where can the audience find you and your products and your services?
elitesleep.ca. Okay. So www.elitesleep.ca, or they can reach out to me at Glenn with 2 N's, Glenn@elitesleep.ca. And I'm sure you'll post that with them.
I will. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. I really appreciate you giving me the time to, talk about my life's work.
The appreciation is all mine. So go enjoy the rest of your day out there on the West Coast.
You take care.
All right. Take care, Bill.
And thank you for your service.
All right. We're out.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Things We All Carry. Head over to the website, thethingsweallcarry.com, for show notes, resources, and to sign up for the newsletter. Until next week, take care of yourselves and remember to check in on each other.